pianists and teachers. Today we're talking about how to teach the Etude Opus 108 number 12 by Ludwig Schytte. And this is frequently titled something along the lines of deep singer or bass singer. Here's what it sounds like. If we haven't met before, welcome to my home piano studio in the suburbs of Chicago. My name is Jana Williamson, and I am happy to share teaching tips and playing tips with you here on my YouTube channel. So like I said, this is an etude by this composer from the 19th century, Schytte, and you do want to be careful with how you pronounce his name. I had to do a little research on how to do this because it looks a little different if you are a native English speaker than if you are Danish, which is what he was. This is from his Opus 108, which is just a series of little etudes. And in preparing for this video, I took a dive into the IMSLP page on this composer, and man, he wrote a lot of pieces from early intermediate or even late elementary, which I would classify this one, all the way up through late intermediate advanced, lots of things for piano students. So might be good sight reading material in there or additional etudes for your students that they might like. Go ahead and check out all the things he's written. He shows up frequently in method books or in intermediate repertoire series because these are great pieces for piano students. And this is one of my favorites. The obvious main features here are that we have a left-hand melody with right-hand repeated chords in G major. And this is why this piece is so good for students, is because so frequently piano repertoire is written with the melody in the right hand with the chords in the left hand. So as soon as your student understands the G major key signature and scales, as well as the primary chords, their method, your teaching method may include learning that basic cadence of the tonic, dominant, and subdominant chords, then they're ready to play this piece. And they'll be working on the technical element of balance and getting that left hand to play a melody beautifully. Now, as I said, this piece is included in a lot of books, and so therefore it is included on my Method to Masterworks spreadsheet. If you haven't checked out that resource yet, please go to the description of this video and check it out. I'm going to list all the books that I've found this in here, and I'm also going to link those in the description of the video. So I'd love for you to go down there and see what you find that might be new to you or helpful to you in this season of your teaching. While I would qualify this as late elementary based on the things that students are required to do in this piece, this is leading us into intermediate study, and I'm looking at it today in Jane McGraw's Masterwork Classics Level 1-2. The levels 1 and 2 are put together into one book. That book is an elementary collection leading a student later on into intermediate study as they go on through that series. This is also found in the Alfred Premier curriculum, the method book, lesson book 3, and Keith Snell includes it in his Etudes book 1, as well as his Essential Repertoire book 1. So let's talk about the right hand chords, because if your student has been practicing that cadence, they might see that right away and want to practice it. There are so many repetitions that I frequently start by asking students to find each time the chord actually changes. So playing the G major chord on the downbeat of measure 1, and then skipping all the way to the downbeat of measure 3, and then back to G major in measure 5, and then the really important one to find is in measure 7, and they may not have experienced this chord. They certainly probably don't have a name for it, and that's a G sus chord, suspended, a G sus chord. It's either the same as a G major chord with a C instead of a B, or you can think about it as that dominant 7th chord, first inversion, with G on the bottom instead of the F sharp. But I think it's much simpler to just explain what a sus chord is, that it has that 4th above the root, that then should usually resolve to the tonic or the regular root position triad. In this case, it's a little bit of a sus from the G that then resolves to the F sharp. So they don't have to understand all of that theory, but they definitely need to know what that chord shape feels like, because they're going to have to be really clear on when do they play this chord versus when do they play this chord. So that's measure 7 and 8. If you drop down to measure 13 and 14, the sus chord is not included. So it simply goes from the G major to that D7 first inversion and back to G. That is a typical problem spot for students, just knowing when they go to here and when they go to here. And I've had students mess that up every time they've played this. So it's something you want to address in the very first lesson on this piece. All right, now more interesting than the chords is the left hand melody. Included in this is a dotted quarter note, eighth note rhythm in our 2/4 time signature. So students should have already had experience with that rhythm so they know how to count 1 and 2 and 1, 2. Whatever way you like to teach that, I will just throw out there that the dotted quarter note rhythm is quite difficult. And when you're first teaching it, it should always be done by rote with something like London Bridge is falling down, or deck the hall with boughs of holly, or if you're working in triple time in 3/4, silent night. I find that most of my students in Midwestern America know those 3 tunes. Your context might be different, but most of them know those 3, and so we do a lot of clapping, tapping, moving to really get that rhythm ingrained before we're ever reading it off of a piece of paper like here. Now, the saving grace about the dotted rhythm in this particular piece is that the right hand is keeping that micro pulse going the whole time. So it's very visually easy to see that the dotted quarter note takes up 3 eighth notes, and then you change on the 4th eighth note in the measure. So it's very easy to play it accurately once you're playing hands together. Once the left hand has mastered that rhythm and you're playing actually phrases, you want your student to go towards the important note of the phrase, which in bars 1 and 2 would be the downbeat of measure 2. And lift up. It's a singer, right? We would call this deep singer or bass singer. We're going to take a breath after that D. And then we have a longer 4-bar phrase, which is very common. 2 plus 2 plus 4 makes up the first, section of a piece. So I'll start at the beginning again and shape those phrases beautifully. Students will resist lifting between the slurs. So I do think the best way to convince them of that is as if they were singing, they would have to breathe. Or if they were playing a trombone or any other, low instrument that might be able to play in this range. The end of the left hand part is quite difficult with this chromatic movement. So it is important that they use good fingering, and every edition that I remember looking at does 1 to 4 on the beat. So there's a little bit of an expansion there. Interval of a 6th going from 1 to 4, but that sets you up really well to then land with your thumb on the D, which helps you naturally shape that phrase. Okay, of course, then we have the issue of balance. And so most students, when they first play this, it will be very, pedantic, and you'll hear this. And I will actually demonstrate that for my students, and they're like, oh, that sounds terrible, because all I can hear is you banging the chords with your right hand. And I just explained to them that's what naturally happens because the right hand is playing so many notes, 3 notes at a time, on every 8th note pulse that we have in the piece. So we have to work on playing the right hand separately very lightly, as well as playing the left hand with beautiful mezzo forte, good full tone. And then we have to practice doing that at the same time. And I just always explain to students that our brains do not like doing different things on the 2 different sides. So convincing your right hand and your left hand to do something drastically different is very difficult. And that's just how our brains are made. And so we just have to practice until our brain is convinced that, yes, this is what we want to do, and our hands can do it naturally. The easiest way to do that is by doing ghost practice, where your right hand plays the keys without actually making any sound, while your left hand plays normally. This is very difficult for students the first time they do it, and I warn them. I say, this is going to be hard. It's hard for everybody. It's not just hard for you. And then we just take, 2 measures or maybe 4 measures, and once they can do that, then we just gradually let the right hand just barely play enough that we can hear it, while the left hand still plays nice and beautifully with good tone at mezzo forte dynamic. One last little tip, students oftentimes want to play this really fast. I think it's because of the repeated chords. I'm not really sure, but it turns into, this kind of like frantic perpetual motion. And they really can't do that when they get to the end because, like I said, that last 4 bars is quite difficult. Plus, the composer notated this moderato for the tempo, so remind them to kind of hold this in, and you could help them by having them write lyrics and sing the melody, and it would feel very frantic if you sang it at that speed with any kind of lyrics that made any kind of sense. Don't forget to go check out the additions I mentioned as well as the Method to Masterworks resource linked in the description to this video. If you found this video helpful, would you share it with a colleague or friend? I would really appreciate it. And I wish you all the best in your teaching.